name's Caitlin Garrity, and as you can see, I am disabled. You can laugh at that, it's alright. The word disabled is not a bad word, it's not a dirty word, it's a fact, you know. I just live my life differently than the large majority of other people, you know. Just a quick overview of my issues. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hope you're paying attention because there will be a quiz after this. To make it easier on everyone, we usually just refer to them by the acronyms EDS, POTS, and MCAS. EDS is a genetic connective tissue disorder, which basically just means that my muscles and ligaments are super stretchy. They're so stretchy that they aren't able to keep my bones in place. POTS is a form of dysautonomia, or dysfunction of the autonomic system. The autonomic system is the part of the body that does all the things you don't think about, like pump your heart, digest your food, or even sweat. All things that my body doesn't do well. And lastly, MCAS is an allergy condition. It's one that's really difficult to simplify, but basically I'm like allergic to myself. The condition makes it so just depending on how happy or mad my body is with me that day, I either may just have a runny nose or I might have multiple episodes of anaphylaxis. I know that it's a lot, and on paper, my life sucks. It's true. Compared to other people my age who have just graduated college and are starting on their careers, my life is a crap show. If I was listening to someone else tell me they were going through the exact same thing, I would think, yeah, awful. But because it's my life, I honestly don't view it that way. I grew up sick, and even though I didn't get my first official diagnosis until I was 18, I spent my entire life in and out of doctor's offices with mystery illnesses and debilitating pain from both migraines, joint pain, all that limited my activities. When I finally found a doctor who said, no, it's not all in your head, you're not crazy. It was one of the best days of my life. I finally had answers and I was on track to starting to manage my symptoms. I have never known any other life than the chronic illness life. So even though on my hardest days, I may wish the pain away, I truly couldn't imagine another life than the one I have. One of my comorbidities, which is like a tag-along condition, is gastroparesis. It's like it sounds, my stomach is paralyzed. Because of this, I have a feeding tube. It's something I'm incredibly grateful for because it literally saved my life. But consequently, it marked me as a visibly disabled person. Before I got it, if someone looked at me, they would just see a normal, regular young woman on the outside. When in reality, I couldn't walk more than 50 feet without getting out of breath and extremely dizzy due to my heart rate skyrocketing. There are visible and invisible disabilities. Both types receive their fair share of prejudice, and usually in different ways. People with visible disabilities are often infantilized, underestimated, and have comments made about them, and much, much more that I won't go into right now. While those with invisible disabilities are often dismissed, told things like they're too young, too pretty, too anything to be disabled. They're told they're too lazy, they should just work harder, get a job, get a life, go outside. They aren't given adequate health care because they don't look sick enough for doctors to take them seriously. There's so much that those with invisible disabilities deal with on a daily basis. So what are invisible disabilities? Well, any disability that you can't see. Any mental disability, hearing impairment, visual impairment, learning disability, and any medical condition that doesn't manifest in a visual manner, which there's way too many to name. When someone parks in an accessible parking spot or uses an accessible bathroom stall, often a person can get dirty looks or even get told off if they don't fit the image that society thinks a disabled person should look like. There's no way for you to know that person's disability. If they're capitalizing on the accessible features that are put in place, then it's usually for a reason. They might not be able to walk very far without pain or fatigue, or they might not be able to sit down or get up without the assistance of grab bars or aids. I always try my very best to go through life giving people the benefit of the doubt, because it's impossible to know someone's life story just by looking at them. That being said, just because accessible features are available to anyone with a disability, doesn't mean anyone without a disability should ever make use of them. I myself will never park in a van accessible parking spot unless it's the very last spot available. Van accessible parking is specifically made for cars that have ramps on them, and all other spots, even other accessible spots, are too small for those vans. The same goes for accessible bathroom stalls. If I don't have my wheelchair, or if I don't need the help with grab bars, I will always choose another stall and leave the accessible one open for someone who may need it. Obviously, if it's an emergency and it's the only stall available, go for it. No one wants an accident. Sorry. So, as you can see, I use a cane. It's just one of my many mobility aids. Because I have what is a dynamic disability, or a disability that can change from day to day, hour to hour, I've accumulated quite a collection of mobility aids. I have a cane, a walker, manual, and an electric wheelchair. I am what you call an ambulatory wheelchair user, which is someone who uses a wheelchair but can walk. The majority of wheelchair users have at least some use of their legs. You'd be surprised at the amount of people who stare at my legs when I'm out with my wheelchair trying to catch me faking. Most of the time I'll just dramatically cross my legs and wait for the reaction. Ambulatory wheelchair users are not uncommon at all, and if you see someone in a wheelchair suddenly stand up at the grocery store, it's not because a miracle has occurred. They're probably just grabbing a can of ragu. It took me a long time to gather the courage to start to use mobility aids, because I had never seen anyone like myself in the media. I had a self-consciousness and a shaming towards having to use a mobility aid. The idea that I wasn't sick enough to need a cane or a wheelchair was stuck deep in my head. Also the fact that I was a young woman and needing a mobility aid at this young age and opening myself up for comments was a very daunting feat. Eventually I got to the point where my need for mobility aids outweighed any hesitancy. Starting to use mobility aids was one of the best decisions in my life. I was able to do more, have more energy, and start to live an actual life because of the introduction of mobility aids. Even though the stigma against mobility aids and who can and can't use them is so strong, the real rule is if you think you might benefit from using a mobility aid, then use it. No ifs, ands, or buts. It doesn't matter what anyone else may try to say. If it can help your life in even the smallest way, then use it. Now to the meat and potatoes y'all pay for. How do you act around a disabled person? Short answer, normally. Treat us just like you would treat Cousin Carl or Bestie Bethany. The long answer, still normally. Treat us exactly like you would treat any other able person in your life. If you're at the grocery store and you walk by someone you didn't know, would you comment on their body? Would you touch them? Would you stare at them? Would you go out of your way to help them without asking them what they needed or wanted? If it's wrong to do all that to a random stranger, then why would anyone believe it's acceptable to comment when the person in a wheelchair walks by? Comments like, hey, slow down there, speed racer, or got a license for that thing? Why is it acceptable to, without permission, asking, grab someone's wheelchair and push them? Why is it acceptable to stare at a disabled person with a visible disability? Why is it acceptable to start doing things for a disabled person, sticking with the grocery analogy, pushing their cart, or putting things on the conveyor belt for them? Some of you might be thinking, all of these things are awful, I'd never do that. But others might be thinking, I'm sure they're just trying to help, or their hearts are in the right place. That might be true, but that doesn't negate the fact that all those actions are incredibly demeaning and often strip a disabled person of their independence and often their dignity. Unless someone specifically asks you for their help, then just go about your day as if you've never come across a disabled person. If you see a stranger with a medical device like mine, you can be curious about it in your own head. When someone I do not know at all comes up to me and wants to know my personal medical information, it's a very uncomfortable situation. Just because I look out of the norm does not mean I am obliged to explain why I look this way. Lastly, I wanted to speak on kind of a touchy subject, prayer. I grew up in the church and I've been sick my entire life. I'm used to people praying over me. I also know many disabled people who have felt that they've had prayer almost weaponized against them. Let me explain. Say you go up to someone and ask to pray over them. Pray for them to be cured. Pray for them to be normal, have a normal life. Imagine if that disabled person had just started to accept that they had something that was incurable and permanent, and was just starting to imagine a life, a fruitful life, as they currently are, not as they wish they could be. Can you see how someone coming up to them, even with the best intentions, it can seem like you're almost saying, you are not enough as you are right now. You shouldn't accept how you are right now, but strive to meet my expectation of good enough. I'm not at all saying don't pray over people, but instead pray for people. If you saw someone with a broken arm, you wouldn't pity their lifestyle and say, let me pray over you to cure you of your broken arm. No, you would pray for healing and recovery. If you decide to pray over a disabled person, just make sure that your intention isn't based on pity or your own idea of an ideal life. Get to know the person and find out what they struggle with, be it getting better health care, more breaks, wishing for more independent living, wishing for more care, because they can't have independent living. The main idea is think about the different expectations both you and that disabled person may have for life, and factor that in before you start your prayer. So, I know this is a lot of information to take in. Believe it or not, this is just scratching the surface of the disability community. There are many, many more types of disability, all with different life experiences and issues specific to them. Overall, the main theme here is the golden rule. Treat others the way you wish to be treated. If someone is different from you, that doesn't mean that you should act any differently towards them. Thank you.